the idea that telling another man that you love him is like kind of gay, or kind of weird, like that whole idea, they've almost like pathologized.
They did, yeah, because you don't want to be.
Yeah, people have kind of like pathologized male friendship to the point that guys might be afraid to say to a male friend that they love them, or to hug them, or to have certain conversations. It's kind of like, no, that's gay.
Yeah. Well, and you see it
really
even
pathological.
It's gone so far. Like now, you see people saying like Frodo and Sam from Lord of the Rings were clearly gay, and it's like, no, it was written by a World War I veteran who literally held his friends in his arms, dying in trenches in France, and so those characters are kind of modeling that deep brotherhood that happens when your life is being extinguished, right? So no, it's not gay or heterosexual. It's just called brotherhood. And this is where the English language struggles, because we only have one word for love, whereas like in Hebrew there's three. There's eros and agape and all that kind of stuff, right? But there's different levels of love, right? The way I love my wife is not the way I would love you in a masculine friendship, right? It's very different. You might
love pizza.
Yeah, exactly. Love pizza. Definitely a very different level of love than what I have for my wife and child, But to drive this point home, I have conversations like this every single day of my life. Men, you have to have friends. You have to have masculine friends that you look up to, that you respect, that you can say things like, I really respect what you're doing, man. It's outstanding. I want to be more like you. Hey, can we get lunch next week? Because I just need more of your influence in my life. I talk like that all the time, and I have tons of masculine friends now, mentors, guys that I look up to. They all do the same thing. It's not weird for any of them. It's weird to not do this. It's weird to be so alone and so isolated that you're like, I don't even know who I can call. I don't know who to pick up the phone and call right now because I'm so overwhelmed. And dude, I just think they'll think I'm weird.
Why do you think that's become so common? We hear a lot about the sort of male loneliness epidemic, obviously in terms of suicide rates. I know in the UK, like for men under the age of, I think, 45, from like 18 to 45, the most common cause of death is suicide. Right?
I believe
men
it.
taking themselves out.
Yeah.
And so that's clearly hinting at something that is deeply wrong in society and culture. And a lot of men say, that, as you've said, that they don't have any close friends, which I'm super extroverted and have been for a long time. So the idea of the math almost kind of doesn't math for me. I'm like, how can a guy not have any close friends? But clearly that is a thing. So how does that happen?
I think it's a lot of factors. I think it's men being raised, like we said, by women, right? I think it's 70+% of the average American modern man is raised mostly by women, either through single parent households with a mom, and then at school, lots of feminine influence. And again, this isn't meaning women are bad, right? It's the lack of masculinity. We need both. Yeah. Like a boy needs a mother and a father.
It should be obvious.
Right. So whoever's listening and you're trying to like pick this apart, I have immense respect for women, and my wife can do things that I could never do. And I have nothing but respect and care for her, and I want the best for her. It's not because I look...
Are you suggesting men can't give birth?
Oh, yeah. I am absolutely suggesting that men cannot give birth.
How dare you?
In fact, yeah. So, but my point is, we can have both and not hate the other, right? And literally, I went viral on Reddit this last weekend for a post like that, where I was like, my mission, I used to train men for battle, and now I train them to be family leaders. Yeah. And that was like, well, how dare you only help men? Why don't you help women? It's like, well, to your point, so many men are so lost, they can't even... They have to come find a guy like me to help them unlearn all of this being stuck. But so I think it's the way they're raised, for one. I think you hit on it, like, oh, you're afraid of being labeled gay or feminine or something because you talk to other men. And it doesn't have to just be talk either. Like this is, initially there's some like, hey man, we need to get to know each other. But after that, it's like, let's go build our businesses or let's go like take the kids out, or like you do things together. It's not just talk therapy, right? So that's another belief there. I think it's also a lot of kind of your point earlier of like we teeter between the traditionalism versus modernity, right? And so men are like, well, I've got to provide and I've got to protect and all this kind of stuff, but then if I try to do these other things and try to lead my household, then I'll be labeled as toxic and everything. And so it's this internal strife of, you're only living like 50% of what you're supposed to be, or if that, right? Like, so those 4 pillars, if you're not living all 4, at best, you're getting a C, right? You're getting a 75% with 3 of them. Most men are walking around with maybe like, 30% of the equation. That feels terrible. Like internally, deep down, like, ooh, I should be able to stand up to this or whatever, right? Like if most men are honest with themselves, they would admit to that, right? And I think that's a huge piece of it, is that it's the internal dissension, not keeping the promises to yourself is the most destructive piece of it when you pile on the other things. And so that's where I start with men first, is we rebuild the man's self-confidence first, and then everything else comes. You can't do it the other way around. Like until you love yourself and respect yourself and hold your own promises to yourself, like use fitness. Yeah. If you can't control what you eat and stay consistent in the gym, do you really think your wife is going to trust that like magically you're just going to change the course of your family now? Doubt it, bro. So that's why I start with fitness really quickly, because it's an easy, quick win for men to be like, okay,
I say this to people all the time.
I'm building the discipline muscle. And people like Andrew Huberman are proving this now scientifically, that like you can literally train your ability to endure pain and grow discipline like you grow your muscles with fitness. So little wins for men is huge because it gets them in motion. And that sense of loneliness and despair goes away very quickly. I'm talking like 3 weeks or less with most of my clients. So I don't think I like crack some secret code. I just think it's how we are, and we've denied it. Like as a culture, we've tried to stray away from this because we want to tap dance around the issue because it might offend someone. And that's the thing, is we need to stop worrying about offending others, because it's like I'd rather offend some people and keep a man on this earth instead of killing himself 100% of the time.
Dude, you're nailing something that I've said multiple times before. And people get confused when I say it because they think I'm being hyperbolic, and I'm not. I often say that political correctness is deadly.
It is. Yeah.
On multiple levels.
Politeness is not kindness.
Yes. Because to solve any problem, first you need to be able to diagnose it. And 100%. To be able to diagnose it, you need to be able to talk about it.
Yes.
So if people are so afraid to talk about the dangers of obesity, and instead you're leaning into body positivity and fat acceptance and you can be healthy at any size, that quite literally is killing people.
Yes.
That messaging is killing people.
Absolutely.
If you are so afraid to talk about the downsides of the impact of fatherless homes and familial breakdown, and you can't talk about that, you might offend this person or that person or whatever. If you can't even talk about that issue, then there are millions of people who are going to suffer intergenerational ramifications of that. And it seems like on a societal level, it's kind of collectively been agreed in the modern Western world. This is not a global thing. There's plenty of places in the world else be very straight up with it, right?
Yeah.
That it's worse to hurt someone's feelings potentially than to say something which is uncomfortable but truthful. Yeah. And actually, if people take that on board, then they can now make certain changes individually and collectively to improve that situation. And I see a lot of the decline that is going on just from this constant, you got to dance around this issue and avoid that, and we can't talk about that, and ooh, that's too harsh, and that might be offensive to that group or that person or whatever. And it's just like, guys, and ironically, it's extraordinarily unmasculine.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly my point is, most men I work with, or most like what I see across the board, is men are afraid of confrontation because we've been led to believe that confrontation inherently means there's anger, and that's not the case. Like, and so I'll give an example. I had to kind of like do this with my wife recently, where she's very like, because of her background, like any kind of intense conversation is yelling to her, and it's like, babe, no, there's a big difference between George yelling and like being a little bit stern with a guy, right? And it's also man to man, right? So we had this like tech come out to work on our AC or whatever, and it was just this big boondoggle, and he forgot the thing and all this stuff. And so I like, after being patient with him for a little bit, I was like, okay, dude, look, you need to call your office right now, figure out what the problem is. I'm not going to spend all day doing this. So like in 10 minutes, I want an answer. If not, like, leave and we'll reschedule this thing. And my wife was like, honey, you're being too mean. I'm like, no, honey, this is like a little bit of confrontation means we both get on with our day faster in a more reasonable solution, as opposed to tap dancing around like, well, I don't want to hurt his feelings. Yeah. Like, and he's a man too. It's like, I'm not going to talk to a woman that way, right? But like, he can take it. He's a tough, hardworking guy, blue collar guy. Like, he needs a little bit of a firmer touch. Yes. Just like a soldier does. Yes. Like, I don't talk to my daughter like I talk to soldiers. Sometimes they need a little bit of a kick in the butt, right? But I say all that to say that like that belief that confrontation means that there's hatred or anger is super dangerous, because men should be confrontational. You should be a man of standards. You should say, no, I don't agree with that. You can live that if you want, but it's not coming over here. Yeah. this is my line. Do not cross it. And if you do cross it, here's what the consequences are going to be. And then you're a man of your word. And this is what I train men to do. When a man can finally do that for himself and he can say the powerful word of no to someone else, not out of hate, not out of, anger or rage or whatever, but just from a, nope, I know what I'm about. I have my beliefs. These are my values. You don't get to change it for me. Whew, he breathes deep again. You can see a man's physical stature change when he is able to do that for himself. And if more of us did that in the Western world, this stuff starts to die very fast. This is a lack of masculinity standing up to say, enough's enough. And here's the thing too, a lot of people accuse me of a lot of things, and I'm not even really like famous or anything,
join the party, man.
Critics, yes, you know this very well. Critics will love to say all these things, right? But everything I do and say is from a position of love for every man out there who's hurting like I was.
Yes.
And I mean, dude, I looked at my Glock and thought about it, okay? Like, I mean, those thoughts come out of nowhere, right? And I had never really considered, there's like 2 times in my life I thought about it. And like, that's scary stuff. And I don't think people really understand that. But most men today are living quiet lives, or they're stuck in quiet desperation. And so the only option they feel available to them is suicide. And if we don't ruffle a few feathers to pierce through and get to those types of guys, nothing changes. It just gets worse. And because you want to be polite, well, you're not being kind. There's no love in that. You just don't want the surface level offense because you would have to think about something that is a little bit hard for you. And again, I don't care what people label me, because my mission is to save men from that darkness. And by extension, that saves families. That makes life better for everyone. And it's very frustrating, because when you see an authentic man be a little bit firm with some people, but totally in control, we all recognize it. Yes. And no one goes, oh, that guy's a jerk. They just go, oh, that guy's a good leader. I mean, you think of like a businessman or something running a large organization. They're short, direct, and to the point, not because they hate you, but because it's like there's a lot going on. It's just how it is. Yes. But then we take it outside to these, interpersonal relationships, and now he's a jerk or he's toxic. And it's like, no.